Hello, and welcome to the Westblend Show. First, let me say, I understand that the statistical likelihood that you disagree with me is quite high. 40% of YouTube UK users are aged 18 to 24, which is by far the largest demographic on the site. And the group which Corbyn receives the most support from is, you guessed it, aged 18 to 24. So I urge you, if you disagree with me straight away, watch the whole video, hear my points out, before you submit that hurtful YouTube comment, and maybe you'll use that comment to challenge me in a more suitable way. Now we got that disclaimer out the way, let's begin the discussion. First, let's talk about one of the areas where Corbyn falls the hardest, his economic policies. Some of his major economic policies are: first, borrow $250 billion to invest in infrastructure. 2. Renationalise the railway, energy industry, the Royal Mail and water companies. And thirdly, increase corporation tax to 26% and increase income tax for those earning $80,000 a year or more to cover spending commitments on the NHS and education budget. This seems a simple list, but there are many complex parts to it, so let's go by one on why his plans for the economy won't work. First, he plans to borrow $250 billion to invest in infrastructure. This is clearly a page out of the Keynesian Economic Handbook, if not the whole chapter. Before I go on, I want to put in perspective how big a figure $250 billion is to borrow in normal economic times. That is 16% of the UK's entire national debt in one policy, and that's not just where he plans to borrow. With that money you could buy 3,571 London Eyes, 574 Shards, or 1.4 international space stations, the single most expensive item ever built. Now, this borrowing $250 billion doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but using this money to promote Keynesian economic principles does not work for the long term, and the only opportune time to use it is during an economic crisis. The reason it was created in the first place was during the Great Depression. During normal economic times, it is highly ineffective to solely use it. At no time in history has Keynesian economics ever truly worked. It was used after World War II in the UK until the 1970s. At this point, inflation was at 25%, unemployment was at 1.5 million, and the country was at breaking point due to Keynesian economics. This was because Keynesian economics were created as a response to the biggest economic crisis ever. It wasn't meant to be used over a prolonged period in normal economic times. And you may say to me, what about FDR in America? He saved the country from the Depression. And that is a valid point. FDR had reduced unemployment from 14 million to under 8 million. But by 1939, there had been another recession due to FDR's policies, and unemployment rose again to over 10 million. The only reason it began to fall again was a reduction in government spending and more jobs available due to World War II. Corbyn's policy of borrowing $250 billion may have short-term benefits to the country, I'm not going to lie, but in the mid to long term, it will leave the country with much more debt in a time we should be trying to reduce the national debt. We've already seen what Labour's excessive borrowing can do to the country. Secondly, Corbyn plans to renationalise a number of industries, but this is categorically wrong and completely uncosted in the Labour manifesto. And each of his plans comes with easier solutions. Firstly, the Labour manifesto points out rising water costs as a reason to nationalise the water companies. But a simple answer to these problems is tougher regulation. The government can force these companies to reduce their prices, similar to what is going to happen in the energy industry. There's no need to own the asset to bring down prices. But to put it in general terms, the main way to improve quality of these services is to increase competition. And Corbyn's way of doing that is to put the country in debt by buying these assets back, and then create a government monopoly again with no competition, where the only people who lose out are the taxpayer and the consumer. And thirdly, Corbyn plans to increase corporation tax to 26% and increase income tax for those earning more than £80,000. This doesn't necessarily have to be bad. These policies can work depending on the extent they're used. However, and this is a big however, to do it at a time when we're leaving the EU is unbelievably short-sighted and will leave this country much poorer than the increases could ever balance out. We're at a point in British history when our relationship with business is very thin ice. Businesses are already worried about Brexit and the impending exit from the single market. And Corbyn plans, instead of reassuring these already worried businesses about their future in the UK, to instead say they have to pay more to stay in the country. To businesses, this is clearly a bad deal. They can pay the exact same rates in France or Germany and stay within the single market. Businesses have no incentive to stay within the UK. When they leave, due to Corbyn's anti-business policies, it will damage the economy to massive proportions, and it will hurt every worker directly and indirectly. And this doesn't even go on to the increases in income tax for people earning more than £80,000. Economists project that if Labour wants to cover all their spending commitments, they will have to raise income tax for people to around 90% back in the days of Wilson. This isn't a disincentive to work hard and earn more in the country. I don't know what is. We will be returning to the 60s and 70s when the UK was seen as the sick man of Europe due to its failing economy. Now, this is just a brief account of his policies, and there are many more that have serious economic consequences, such as giving more power to trade unions. But we can't fit why Corbyn's economic policies will ruin the country in one video. So as I'm sure that many of you disagree with me, please leave a comment, which will probably start an argument, and we might join it because we're too stubborn to leave things alone. This has been The Westland Show. Speak soon.